Hello and welcome to Wild Sounds, the film podcast. My name is Kierston Dreyer, and I'm here with my co-host Matthew Toffolo. And today we are continuing our podcast series on 10 films that changed cinematic history. So Matt, we are in studio today.
Yes, we are. We are talking one-on-one usually I'm in Richmond Hill and you're in Toronto, so.
Yeah, no, this is really cool, really cool. We are in a cinema talking about cinema, and it's going to be really neat today. I want to talk about a film that I can guarantee I have seen. I guarantee you have seen it. I guarantee your parents have seen it. And I'm going to go out on a limb and guarantee that your children will see it. You want to know what film I'm talking about?
Does it start with white, something white?
Yes, Snow White, for sure, for sure. This is a absolute classic film that I'm gonna say is one of the few films that every generation for the past like 3 or 4 generations will see. Would you agree?
100%. Yeah.
Absolutely. You want to talk about it?
I would love to talk about this because it's got also, just from a storytelling standpoint, it's got a great story, but also how the film was made. It's almost even better story, right?
Absolutely. That really, this is one of those pieces where making the film was as big a story as the film story itself. So, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is 1937, and it's based on a German Grimm's fairy tale where Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I mean, I guess we can't. Dwarf might not be a word we use anymore. It's a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale. They're magical. So it's produced by Walt Disney Productions and was originally released by RKO Radio Pictures. And it's the first full-length cell animation, which is a big deal. Like, yes, there were animated features prior to this, but none of them were long enough to be considered like a standard feature. But Snow White certainly is.
So I guess back in the day, they would before the feature films would be shown in the movies, they would show the news clips, and they would show short films, animation short films, like that are 5-10 minutes, and then the feature presentation would start. But of course, that's not done anymore, and this was the first time that one of those animation short films became an actual feature, and people didn't think that it could happen, that the attention span of a regular audience member could sustain 90 minutes for an animation movie.
Absolutely. That's exactly what they thought. They thought, animations are great and quick and wonderful when you're doing them right before. It's like a teaser to the main feature. Like, they're thinking those animations of, like, let's all go to the lobby, like dancing popcorn. But Walt Disney was like, no, I think we can really, really hard time getting the film off the ground. And that's kind of where the story gets really cool. So Snow White followed a nationwide release in February prior to its December 21st, 1937 release. But prior to it, Disney Animation was largely about like Mickey Mouse and the Silly Symphony series. And Walt Disney had a really hard time just getting the project financially funded. It was slandered during development, and while it was in production, it was referred to as Disney's folly because people had so little faith in it. Walt Disney's brother Roy and his business partner both they tried to talk him out of it. His wife tried to talk him out of it, and due to the lack of capital, Disney mortgaged his own home just to drum up cash flow. The film was purported to have totaled well over $1 million in cost, which is a massive sum at the time. Keep in mind, this is like the 1930s. We're in the heart of the Depression.
Yeah. And he just believed in it. What do you think his mental scope was? Like, he just believed in this project 100%.
As conflicting of a character as Walt Disney is, when you look at him as a person, some of his beliefs and ideologies don't hold up by today's, mindsets. Some of the things he thought were a little, but what we can say is that when it comes to the animated world, he was a visionary, and this is absolutely one of his visionary pieces that he believed in and held to, and the payoff was big.
And you also know that his head is frozen, so he might come back. Right?
Yeah, I heard about that.
He comes back and he starts doing all these anti-Semitic like phrases and like, yeah.
There's a fantastic Family Guy sketch about that where they thaw Walt Disney and the first thing out of his mouth is something really inappropriate, and they're like, put him back in. So, despite all of the issues with the film, it was an unbridled success. It was wildly received with audiences, standing ovations for when it was released in theaters by the crowd. He was on the cover of the New York Times. He had a remarkably long box office run for the time. At the end of its original run, it is reported to have grossed just shy of $8 million, making it a massive success for RKO. And it had released in theaters. It has since released in theaters for special anniversaries and has had a lifetime revenue of over $418 million. So adjusting for inflation, this film still registers as like the top 10 American money-making films of all time.
And of course, it jump-started the company Disney, right? Like, if this movie fails, we don't have the Disney Channel, we don't have the Disney stores, we don't have the Disney theme parks, we don't have the Disney movies. Like, this is one of those there's those situations where if you go back in time and say the movie bombs, all of a sudden what we're consumed by, it changes drastically in what we're today, right? So
Like, unlike The Wizard of Oz, which is heralded as a classic but bombed in the box office, unlike Freaks, which was banned in cities and places, countries all across the world, which is now a canon classic, like, this started big and still is big. Like, even today, Snow White is a household name that everybody knows.
everybody knows what Snow White is. So
Absolutely.
let's talk about the storytelling. So what's the basis of course it's an animation, but what grabbed the audience? Like, why did the audience take to this film?
It's absolutely stunning, and it's cell animation too. So it's every detail, every aspect has to be painted like a portrait. It really is like going to an art gallery, seeing a painting that would be made by an expert artist, and then watching that move and tell you a story. That's really how it looks. Like, it's not the craftsmanship it takes to produce great art is evident in every frame.
And of course, you got the romance aspect of it. And you also have the archetypes of the 7 little people, I guess. Right?
Fun fact. So they were the names, Sneezy, Dopey, Laffy, whatever they were. They all got pulled out of a hat, and in that hat were a bunch of them, like Nifty and Swifty, and like a whole bunch of other names you've never heard of. They just pulled 7 out of a hat. And went, these are the dwarves.
I'm always curious about how did they get the name when they're born? Like, so then all of a sudden you're Sneezy, so then of course they're going to be Sneezy when
It's
they
a
grow up.
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. So when does the name occur? Like, when does the name? So anyways,
Maybe they don't put those kind of labels on them too
So
young.
if I call my future son Dopey, then he's going to be Dopey, right?
No.
Like, it just happens because that's what I call him, right?
See, this is one of those things. Like, I'm sure they withhold judgment on the young dwarves, and as they grow, they pick the trait that applies to them most, and then it just sticks with them for life.
Yeah.
Like a nickname that never dies. I have a bunch of fun nicknames from when I was a kid. Some other time I'll get into my nicknames. So it's a beautiful, beautiful film to watch. Like, you just can't argue with it. It holds up today. Even today, you can watch it and go, wow, it's just visually stunning. Like, it doesn't look like an animated CGI film like, say, Toy Story, but it's still just as visually engaging. So the American Film Institute has released a variety of annual awards that still recognizes this film as a critically hailed work of art, not just a cinematic masterpiece, but a work of art. Within 2 years, the success of Snow White had sparked Disney's future masterpieces, including Bambi and Fantasia, which all began basic production within 2 years of releasing Snow White. So why is it important for the culture and society? How did it change cinema? Well, it proved that animation could be acceptable for all ages, and that it had the carrying capacity for feature-length films. It launched the golden age of Disney. It's socially hailed as an American classic, although it is a German fairy tale, and its cultural significance is still relevant today, from Broadway musicals to theme parks to Halloween costumes. And the story arc is really, really good because it follows the classic trope of the journey of a fairy tale, but it's been moved up a little bit, and also it wasn't as violent as as the original fairy tales can be, and they do change some details to make them more palatable. For example, I think in the original Snow White, she's like 7 years old, and they kind of had to make her a little bit older, so it wasn't so creepy. But they made those tweaks, but also the hunter is supposed to come back with her heart in a box. Like, that's a pretty violent thing, right? And they don't shy away from the original story. They make those tweaks to make it palatable.
So in a nutshell, they made the German dark story bright in America.
Yeah, they did, and it's a beautiful piece, and it still holds up today. And the story beats are very well structured, so it's a good story to watch all around. It delivers everything in a perfect and beautiful cinematic package.
There's musical numbers. It's funny. It's romantic. It's he's good to look at. So yeah, he took a chance, and obviously it paid off, right?
It was an unbridled success. So Snow White's success very likely is what helped propel Disney into the world of making features. It's a testament to going with your gut and having it pay off. You got anything else, Matt?
That's a good way to live sometimes. It's like if every 5 year instinct is telling you to go one way. I know it's kind of an idealistic thing to talk about, but just do it, because this is what this man's the kahunas on this man. Like, just whatever you want to say about him, right?
I mean, imagine mortgaging your house. What kind of gamble is that if it failed?
And imagine in the modern times, maybe his wife wouldn't let him now because his wife has more say. Who knows?
I don't know what his marital world was like, but I can say that in the heart of the 1930s, in the heat of the Great Depression, mortgaging your house for a film Sounds dangerous, and it was. If it hadn't have succeeded, it likely would have ruined Disney.
Yeah, he never had children as well, right? So maybe like it's like all these kind of all these factors, situational factors that kind of change your lifestyle. Like he could do all these things, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I sometimes type words and they end up on Twitter. And if you want to read them, you can follow me at the Kierstonator. That's Kierstonator. You can reach me at K Dreyer at the Wild Sound Festival, or you can reach us at the podcast at wildsoundpodcast.com. You can find Matthew on Twitter at Matthew Toffolo, Toffolo, and you can always reach us on Twitter at Wild Sound Pod. We want to hear what you think of this piece. Like, why don't you guys, if you feel like it, you tweet at us and tell us what you want us to talk about next, because we like doing these mini series on the films that change cinematic history. Matt, you got anything else?
got nothing else.
All right, well, that's Snow White. What's next?